Hey everyone, today I'm going into the top Reylo and Ben Solo highlights of the recent comics, Star Wars Legacy of Vader Issue 2, and the Rise of Skywalker adaptation Issue 2 as well. I'll also throw in some other in-universe highlights for the Star Wars timeline in general. If you don't know me, I'm Mari Mole. I talk about Star Wars on this channel, so if you like any of what you hear today, go ahead and give a like. So let's get started. These two issues both contain some great Kylo Ren and Ben Solo moments, as well as General Reylo moments, something we've been lacking in Star Wars media in the past few years. So it's really great to see Rey and Ben Solo fans eating well right now. I know I'm definitely here for it. And let's get started with the Kylo Ren side of things with Legacy of Vader, Issue 2. So last time I covered the first issue of Star Wars Legacy of Vader, and you can check out that highlight list on the link below. And if you want to see the first video on the highlights of that issue. But jumping right into the second issue, we get Vanay taking Kylo Ren on a tour of Tatooine, the home of Anakin Skywalker and later Luke Skywalker. Vanay wants to show Kylo the dark and painful life of Anakin, how the pain of his life as a slave and the loss of his mother Shmi was used to access the dark side of the Force. Vanay thinks of himself as kind of a super fan of Darth Vader, and he used Vader's secret codes to access all of the files of conversations between Vader and Palpatine. So we learned that Vader told Palpatine almost everything about his life, and I guess because he had no one else to talk to at this point. And this leads to my first highlight. And you see in this panel that Kylo points out that the Emperor used Vader. The comic Rise of Kylo Ren showed us a few years ago that Kylo has always been aware that has been used by others. That's how he sees himself, as being used by the light side and the dark side and the people who use it. So he saw himself as being used by Snoke. He just felt he had no choice in the matter, that this is his only path in life was to be a tool of the dark side under Snoke. And I think this is worth pointing out because at this point in Kylo's life, he doesn't see himself as being used. He thinks he's broken free of any chains. Later on in Rise of Skywalker, this will also provide context to Kylo's decisions, and we will know that he never has any intention of serving Palpatine either. And he expects to kill the Emperor to keep himself from being dominated. And I want to highlight something else here. The Mos Espa arena doesn't seem to be looking too well this many years after Return of the Jedi. There's no indication of what happened here, and we don't seem to know what happened to Boba Fett either, but this still points to the decline of the Hutts and their influence. But anyway, yeah, I wanted to point that out as well, just to let us see how Tatooine is looking in the timeline. And in this panel comes my third highlight. I think it's great that Ben Solo is angry on Shmi's behalf. I mean, sure, it's a criticism at the Jedi from his perspective, but he still feels anger at being separated from Leia. And as I pointed out in the first issue, he always refers to her as his mother and never by her first name as he does with his father Han Solo. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ben is thinking what I thought 20 years ago: why didn't the Jedi just bring Shmi along? Would have maybe mitigated a lot of the emotional turmoil Anakin would feel later on down the road. And then in the next 3 or so panels, we get some great flashbacks from Ben Solo's perspective as a child. These are his memories that he's thinking of when Vanay inquires whether Ben's life was similarly as rough as Anakin's. And this is where we get to my next highlight, number 4. Ben tells Vanay that, of course, he suffered like Anakin. Now, you could say that he is lying to make himself seem more similar to Anakin for Vanay's benefit or to justify his own decisions with the dark side. I think it's also possible that Ben sees his memories of his happy life with his family as suffering because he was ultimately separated from that happiness. He knows he was happy then. And it's still worth pointing out that to Rey, he never says that he hated his father, and he definitely doesn't do anything like that here either. So, at any rate, Kylo decides that his grandfather probably came back to kill his owner Watto. But of course, we all learn that Vader didn't bother doing so. But he does learn from Vinay that Gardulla the Hutt was the first owner of Anakin, and that she is also still alive. So he decides he will kill Anakin's past for him. It's kind of amusing because, as this comic points out in my fifth highlight, Anakin himself never bothered to kill Watto or Gardulla. There wasn't really a revenge tour for him. He just killed who Palpatine wanted him to kill. So Kylo decides a revenge tour is in order for his late grandfather, and I have to say, I love this image right here. Kylo in it looks more sad than anything else, and I don't think he has any real plan here. I think his image of his grandfather isn't what he thought it was. That Anakin was essentially a hurt boy that never actually got to address those things that caused him pain in the first place. And that's probably a little unsettling for Kylo. And also, unrelated, but this image of this desert mansion of Gardulla the Hutt is amazing. I love this picture. That's all. And yeah, once again, we learned that Gardulla the Hutt has come upon hard times since we last saw her in the prequel trilogy, and she is seeking to regain power again. And in this comic, we finally meet a new Force user, a weird little guy that takes down Kylo pretty handily. And yeah, classic weird little guy, and he wastes no time in calling Kylo Ren weak. And this is pretty cool because this comes to my next highlight about how Kylo has been unbalanced since Rey left him in The Last Jedi and since the death of his uncle Luke. Because he's unbalanced, he can't defeat this new Force user, which gives us this classic Luca Ross topless image of Kylo in chains. Last year, comic illustrator Ross gave us topless Jango Fett, and I knew he'd give us a topless Kylo as well. Of course, Kylo just likes to be shirtless all the time, so it's not a new thing for him, but I had to chuckle at this all the same. And that's it for our Legacy of Vader highlights. You can read issue 2 yourself. I highly suggest you do so to kind of get more information over where it's heading. But for right now, I just want to move on to the Rise of Skywalker issue 2 Reylo highlights. Now, I'm assuming you've watched the Rise of Skywalker, excuse me, so I'm not going to hash out this comic for you because you've already seen the movie, but I do want to highlight some insights that this adaptation gives us. So, first of all, this issue gives us a lot of great dyad moments in the art. And I do want to point out this one panel because it kind of seems like Kylo may have been thinking he hit Rey with his TIE Whisper. I'm not sure that's actually the intent, but we do know he wasn't trying to kill her and that he just wants to make her angry. But this panel here is really cool because we have Kylo thinking in a thought bubble. It's true, all of it. He's thinking of the words that Palpatine told him, which weirdly he thinks lightning proves he's his grandfather, but that's another story. But anyway, this line is what Han Solo told Finn regarding the Force. So he's once again channeling his father. And then we finally get this vision of Rey illustrated, and it's hot. Rey saw herself on the throne with Kylo, and for some reason we never got a vision or image of this, but it's here now. Empress Rey, everyone. We also get Rey seeing where Chewie was tortured by Kylo. Now, this was a deleted scene that only wound up in the novelization, but the comic gives us a brief glimpse, and of course, it's this image here that lets Rey know Chewbacca was alive. But this highlight is really interesting because it's less that Rey sensed Chewie so much as it is that Rey sensed her dyad Kylo Ren and what he was doing to Chewie. And now comes my final highlight for the Rise of Skywalker adaptation comic. These thought lines from Kylo here show that his entire plan was never to kill Rey. Now, I already figured this out from the movie, and I think most people have at this point, but it was something that confused a lot of moviegoers. But for those of you who still think Kylo was trying to kill Rey on Sidious's behest, this comic spells it out that he had zero intention from the beginning of ever killing her. But like I said, this is also a really good comic to read. It's kind of taken us years to get Hauser and Sliney's adaptation of The Rise of Skywalker, but I'm glad it's here, and I like their take on the story. And I highly recommend both of these comics, Star Wars Legacy of Vader and Star Wars Rise of Skywalker adaptation. But let me know what you think in the comments. Are there any comics of Star Wars that you really personally love? Just let me know. May the Force be with you.